And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. Going to flash up this roster projection here. It starts off with the off-season dates. So let's go through that first. Again, this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. As long as that website's still chugging along, which who knows, maybe it only has a day left or so before it completely implodes. But hey, we'll still use it. Yeah.
What will we do if Twitter does fold? What's next?
Go to Blue Sky. This is kind of funny. We can get into it for a second here. Jack Dorsey sold Twitter to Elon Musk effectively, like he was the head of the board, and so he basically invented Twitter, and took the proceeds from that and created a alternate platform, like an open source platform called Blue Sky, which is effectively just Twitter. And so it's basically just sitting there like waiting for Twitter to implode, at which point there will be no alternative. And he'll just be like, well, why don't you use this? And then, like all the Twitter people will just kind of migrate over here because it's the only thing that makes sense. And it's the exact same API effectively. And so
you had to go to look it up. It's not even like rolling yet though,
it's
right?
in beta right now. It's in beta.
Yeah,
You need to invite code. So they're literally just like laying the foundation and putting up the walls and making sure there's a ceiling over everything, and they have to have people in there to beta test it. So that's what they have. I have an account, and so they're just like, their goal is effectively like very clearly just to be like, well, Twitter's on life support, so why don't we just make sure this is here for when everyone just abandons ship officially. It's very funny to me because he like used the money from Twitter, from the buyout from Elon Musk, to basically bankroll this operation, which is effectively just there to completely undermine Twitter once it becomes what it is right now. It's just kind of funny. It's a good business.
Would be really funny if he named it Blue Check Mark or Blue Check or whatever.
Right, Blue Sky. And the app, the logo on the app is just clouds.
Maybe maybe when, like you said, it all goes down, they can import my followers and who I'm following from Twitter onto there.
Yeah, all those bots that are following you.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So as we mentioned, the Saints offseason dates, we have the rookie mini camp May 12th through 14th. So that starts on Thursday. The open practice is on Saturday. That is the final day. We'll have open locker room. We'll be able to get in there and talk to all the rookies and all the UDFAs and whoever else is there. I had someone ask if we could go check in with Smoke Monday. He might be there. Occasionally, you'll have second-year players there. Like last year, Jalen McCluskey. JJ's his dad. Jalen McCluskey was there, right? He wasn't a rookie, but he was there. So it's possible that Smoke Monday is out there, and maybe he's just trying to get as much work in as he can. So if he is, I will go talk to him. But again, we don't know exactly who's going to be out there. One thing we didn't mention in the first segment is, as far as I'm aware, none of these Saints rookies have actually signed their rookie deals. So they would actually have to sign a waiver to participate, at least the drafted rookies. So I imagine they'll do that, but there is a chance that some don't show up if they're negotiating, right? Alante Taylor took a long time to sign his contract last year, and it was just they're negotiating over guaranteed money. It wasn't ever like an animosity thing. So if we get extended here and people haven't signed their contracts, it's not a big deal. So going forward, then OTAs, May 23rd to 25th, May 30th through June 1st, and then June 5th through 8th. Those are optional again. Then mandatory minicamp, June 13th through 15th. And then the full training camp. We don't have the official dates for that, but it's usually the last week of July that everything gets going. So that's what we'll be looking at. I'm not going to be updating this roster projection after every set of OTAs or whatever, but I probably will update it at least once post-mandatory minicamp, pre-training camp, to kind of reflect on what we've seen. We won't see a lot of the veterans until that mandatory minicamp. Like Demario Davis probably won't show up. Marshawn Lattimore probably won't show up until mandatory minicamp. So keep that in mind. But yeah, so as we're going through this, if you're watching on YouTube, if there's a star next to the name, that means it's a drafted rookie. So like a Jordan Howden, for example. Or if there's 2 stars, that means it's a UDFA, an undrafted free agent. So the first position is pretty easy. Quarterback, Derek Carr, Jameis Winston, Jake Haener. You're going to carry 3 because you cannot cut Jake Haener. He will get claimed. You cannot stash him on the practice squad. So that does take away a position that last year you only carried 2. So that gave you an extra spot down the line. This year you're going to have to carry 3, and you traded up in the 4th round to go get Jake Haener. Unless he is atrocious, which I don't anticipate he will be, you're not cutting him out of camp. So you're keeping 3 quarterbacks, in my opinion.
Yeah, unless some kind of miraculous trade appears for a Jameis Winston kind of thing. But I agree with you. You're going to have 3.
That's a good point. If you end up with 2, it's going to be because Jameis Winston isn't on the roster. And that's not me saying I think Jameis is going to get cut. I'm just saying there are situations that could develop. Like, what if he gets hurt, right? Or what if he just gets completely outplayed, which I don't think he will. But, like, you're not cutting Jake Haener. You're not cutting a rookie that you're still trying to develop to save a roster spot. If you are desperate for a roster spot and you feel comfortable that Jake could back up Derek Carr, then maybe you would cut James. I don't think you're going to.
No, that's why I said you would. To me, would have to be some kind of DEFCON 5 situation happening with another team, and they're like, "Hey, Saints, we'll give you a 5th rounder for Jameis."
Right? Yeah, like I could see that being the case. Although, like, it's even then, like, that would be unlikely to even get that offer, right? But either I think you are going into this expecting Jameis to be the backup, so there's no incentive to do anything else. And for now, I'm not going that route.
Right.
I think you are keeping 4 backs. And in this case, I kept a fullback. I kept Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, Kendry Miller, and Adam Prentice. And I don't know if you need to keep the fullback. Like, maybe you keep a 4th running back and you run a lot more 2 running back sets. It's really just a question of whether you trust Kendry as a blocker in his rookie season. And if you do, you might be able to get away with 3 running backs. But I feel like at this point, I'm willing to sacrifice that roster spot and keep a 4th fullback, H, whatever you want to call it. And so that's my running backs right now, which means that I cut Sir Roderick Thompson Jr. and Eno Benjamin.
Yeah, I mean, we saw very little of Eno last year, obviously, and didn't do anything that would solidify any kind of spot on this roster, even going into this year right now. And, I think the need for the fullback, we've seen this team prefers to use him, I feel like.
Yeah, I think they just like having him around. He's useful on special teams, right? Like, if Eno Benjamin makes this roster, it's going to be because he stands out as like a gunner, right? Like, it's not going to be based on his abilities at running back. And I just don't know. I haven't seen him enough. If he goes out there and he shows off and he gets into those preseason games and he is a gunner, like Ty Montgomery, for example, was excellent as a gunner. It's unusual for a running back to be really good in that role, but it's not unheard of. Dwayne Washington was a very good special teams guy. Yeah. So there's a chance that Eno Benjamin makes himself uncuttable. I think it's more likely that you move on from him and you stash Sir Roderick on the practice squad, but we'll get down to that.
Yeah, maybe so Eno would have to be like the next Dwayne Washington, right?
Right. Or Ty Montgomery. Right, exactly. Like, that's the role he's in. He's not going to beat out Alvin, Jamal, or Kendry. Now, if Alvin gets a suspension handed down in the preseason, right? If he ends up serving a 6-game suspension and we know, and it's weeks 1 through 6, maybe you do keep Eno Benjamin around because you might want to have that extra kind of guy that's trustworthy who's been in an offense before. But that's something I'm not going to predict right now, but that's something to keep in mind. All right. Down to wide receiver. I'm keeping 6 of them. So I'm keeping Brian Edwards, Chris Olave, Traquan Smith, Michael Thomas, Rashid Shaheed. And then A.T. Perry is that guy who's a 6th-round pick. In theory, he's not guaranteed a spot on this roster, but I do think that you want to keep either one of these 6'3", 6'5" receivers between him and Shaquan, the UDFA. So I go with A.T. Perry right now because they did trade up to get him, so they clearly like him. And so I think he's going to be that guy. But here are the cuts. So Kawan Baker, Cy Barnett, who's a UDFA, Shaquan Davis, who's the UDFA out of South Carolina State, then Keith Kirkwood, Malik Flowers, who's the UDFA return specialist out of Montana, and then Kirk Merritt. Several of these guys are going to end up on the practice squad, but unless one of these guys shows up and just dominates in camp, I have a hard time seeing them beating out anyone in that list above.
The one of the cuts that I'm interested to see more of is Kawan Baker, just because we really haven't seen anything from him. Dealt with some PED stuff last year and got suspended. But yeah, not a big guy either. I agree with you too. They need to have that big physical presence, especially we don't know what we're getting out of Michael Thomas anymore.
Yeah, and they've made a clear effort to bring that guy in. So they're not going to suddenly just not keep one on the roster. I think they're going to try to keep one on the roster. Now, they could both just tank, in which case maybe you do go with someone you trust, maybe a Kirkwood or a Merritt, right? I think Malik Flowers is programmed to the practice squad, just like Rashid Shaheed was last year.
Yeah.
But that's going to be, this will be a position where I don't expect a ton of change. People get hurt, right? Like that's probably what could change this significantly more than anything else is if someone suffers an injury. The Saints have been pretty fortunate over the last several years in terms of not getting screwed over by injuries. So hopefully that continues.
The biggest thing for Traquan too is his blocking that valuable to keep him on the roster, I think.
You hear the cat? You can hear that?
Yeah.
God, Gypsy, what are you doing?
She agreed on Traquan.
Are you done? Okay. Yeah, Traquan's interesting. Yeah, I could see Traquan getting beat out, but it'd have to be a good reason, right? Like it'd have to be someone who stands out on special teams, stands out as a blocker. Maybe Kirk Merritt. Maybe the coaches love Kirk Merritt and they keep him around. But I don't think it's going to happen to keep Shaquan Davis and A.T. Perry. I don't think you need two of those guys. I think you need someone who can be a blocker, who can be a special team standout in that role. So that's something to keep in mind. Tight end, I'm keeping 3. Now, Miller Forrestal is on this list, and you can kind of look at that as just the free space in bingo. Like they need a blocking tight end. I don't know if Miller Forrestal is that, but he's the only guy on the roster right now who could be that tight end. So I'm basically just have him there as as a space filler, knowing that they're going to inevitably put a blocking tight end in that role because Taysom Hill and Juwan Johnson are the other tight ends I'm keeping. Neither is that. So right now I'm keeping 3 tight ends, and Miller Forrestal is one of them.
And it's even hard to put Taysom in that group, but I know you got to put him somewhere, and that's where this team, quote unquote, considers his position, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a numbers game. I mean, we can put him at quarterback and say you're keeping 4 quarterbacks. It doesn't change anything. You're keeping Taysom Hill on the roster.
Right.
But that means you're cutting Lucas Krull and Joel Wilson, the UDFA out of Central Michigan. Again, they're probably both going to end up on the practice squad. Like I have no issue with that. I just don't see a spot for them this year.
Tight end's a spot that's going to be interesting come camp 2. We'll see what happens if there's cuts, with other teams and they release like a veteran this team's interested in, just because, man, that free agent market just is not very attractive.
I agree. Okay. Last spot on the offensive side of the ball. It's offensive line. I think you're keeping 9. You might keep 10, but I do think that having the cross-positional flexibility of an Eric McCoy and a Cesar Ruiz helps you trim this number down by at least 1. So the keeps are obvious, right? So Eric McCoy, Cesar Ruiz, Andres Pete, James Hurst, Trevor Penning, and Ryan Ramczyk. That's your starting offensive line. And then you're also keeping Nick Saldiveri, who's the 4th-round rookie, traded up for James Hurst, Lewis Kidd, and Landon Young. All of these guys had roles last year.
Right.
Obviously, with the exception of Nick Saldiveri, who's the rookie. And I think you're just going to go from there. It's possible some of these guys get beat out, but in this kind of baseline projection, I'm going with the veteran experience over any of the UDFAs. And so that means that you're cutting Alex Pihlstrom, Mark Evans, both UDFAs, then Calvin Throckmorton, who has been effectively replaced by Saldiveri, and then Storm Norton, who was a offseason signing. I don't think that they have any qualms about moving on from him, but he's probably just there to be depth. I could see him landing on the practice squad.
Yeah, I was going to say right there, it's like you got practice squad possibilities there, and they obviously saw something in Storm Norton to sign him kind of deal. But, I wouldn't expect him to make the 53-man roster.
Now, if Trevor Penning's foot does not heal the way you'd hoped, and he has a setback, and he's not ready midway through camp. Maybe Storm Norton is a guy you throw on there and you keep 10, right? You'd hope that's not the case, but I think he's around and he's an option. The other guy who he could bump off is Lewis Kidd. And if Storm Norton shows up in camp and just, outplays Lewis Kidd, then sure, move on from him. But right now I'm going with the guy I've seen play. And he made the roster last year as a UDFA. The coaches like him. So until Storm shows up and blows the doors off, if you will, I'm going to go with Lewis Kidd. But that is the end of the offensive side of the equation here. Any thoughts?
Looking good to me. What you said about Penning too is so true. Unfortunate that he's already had to deal with 2 surgeries on his foot, and yeah, we haven't heard really anything about his development coming back from the latest injury that happened, right in the last game of the year. But obviously, the big things are expected from the dude that was a first round. Your first round pick. You can't have another season like last year. I'll obviously a rookie year to get a little bit acclimated with this team, but just availability wasn't enough. When he did play, we saw that gradual development for him. So I'm not giving up or saying the pick is a bust or anything, but man, you got to stay on the field, obviously.
Yeah, you want to see him be able to stay healthy, right? Like he's gotten very good reviews. Like the coaching staff thought he played very well in that Week 18 game that he got hurt in, right. And that's the only negative is that he messed up his foot in that game, right? But the development throughout the season was positive, and he learned different roles, right? He played the jumbo role, he moved around, and so that's a positive thing that he was able to pick that up. Hopefully he can get back, right? But all right, let's wrap that segment up. We're going to come back. We're going to go through the offensive side of the ball. As you noticed, no UDFAs have made it yet. So foreshadowing, right? No rookies have been cut, so foreshadowing, right? And so we'll go through that next. So stick around on Inside Black and Gold. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. Please leave a rating, leave a review. We got a nice rating and review today. Thank you. I wish I could say who it was, but it's just a generic username, but they were very friendly. So if you wouldn't mind going on Apple Podcasts and doing that, it's always appreciated. I like to hear from y'all. I enjoy the feedback. It helps us get better. So please do that. But as you experienced previously, we went through the offensive side of the equation on our way too early 53-man roster projection. And now we're going through the defensive side of the ball. And it's going to get a little more interesting on this side. Steve, what positions are you most intrigued to watch at rookie minicamp OTAs as we're going forward?
I got to say it's going to be all the new faces on that D-line just because of the pieces that were here for a while that you're accustomed to seeing. The David Onyemata, Shai Tuttle, and just want to see how the other guys, I guess, acclimate to this new, you got a new D-line coach too. So just all around that whole, just want to see how the unit works together along with the new coach.
Yep. Todd Grantham, you obviously spent your first 2 draft picks on defensive linemen and Brian Brzee and Isaiah Foskey. And so I think what you really want to see this year is kind of an inkling of, okay, this can be the defensive line of the future, right? Like I want to come away from this season feeling confident that one day when Cam Jordan does inevitably retire, you're not just, the cupboard isn't bare. Because based on, when you miss on a draft pick like you did with Marcus Davenport and you use 2 years of first round picks to do that, and then he's out the door and you're like, man, what are we going to do? Right. And you think Peyton Turner might be that guy, but you haven't seen it. So you need to come out of this year feeling like we have a plan here at defensive line. And so I think you have the pieces in the building and they need to show up. But so we're keeping 9 defensive linemen. So we'll go through the defensive ends first. So that's Carl Granderson, Cam Jordan, Tano Passanio, Peyton Turner. All 4 returning players. No surprises there. You didn't really do anything on free agency on the defensive end side of the equation. So you are banking on Peyton Turner being a contributor. And as you should, he's a first round pick going to year 3.
I was like, please contribute anything.
right? And when I talked to Cam about it, he was basically said, like, you got to be available, right? And,
Yeah.
he doesn't say that lightly because he's a guy who's always available. Like, it means something to him when you're talking about availability, and he's got to be on the field. I think he's played in 13 games over 2 years. That's just not enough. So that's the first step, is being healthy, being on the field. And if he can do that, then maybe he can make an impact. But I do think you still feel good about Carl Granderson. Tano Passanio is a guy you trust. You brought him back. And then Isaiah Foskey is a guy you're going to really try to work in. I think is going to be a plug and play guy to an extent. Like, he's going to be getting significant snaps week one. He might outsnap Brian Brzee week one, just in terms of what you need from him and the fact that you have two capable defensive tackles in front of him at a position where you don't really rotate as much. But either way, this is a position where you're going to be trying to get some youth movement involved here.
Yeah, Granderson for me is definitely that guy we've seen steady growth from, and really intrigued to see what he does this season. I think he has that possibility to be kind of like that Caden Ellis kind of player from last year that, took even that really next great step, and hopefully can push Peyton Turner along with the addition of Isaiah Foskey, because I don't know what to make of him. I love, your sit down with Cam, and like he said, it's like I see him putting in the work. It's not like the kid's not trying, but all that being said, he, in the end, you gotta be available. It goes back to that.
Yeah, and sometimes you got to play hurt, right? Like, and you wonder after a certain point, it's like, okay, everyone's kind of hurt, right? It's the NFL. No one's feeling 100%. And are you able to push through that and still get the work in? Like, not necessarily play. Like, everyone wants to play. I think players are willing to play, but are you willing to do the work when you are not feeling 100%? And I think that's where, if you're losing Peyton Turner, it's there. It's when he has to fight through something to get the work in. And that's where I don't know if you're doing it. And that's why you're seeing him struggle on the field. That's just a theory. But when you hear Jeff Ireland come out and say, like, he's got to show up in shape, he's got to do this, he's got to do that. They, like, coaches and scouts and analysts, they're not looking for reasons to have a player want to sock you. But like, when you have to say that stuff out loud, it's to send a message, and hopefully you receive that message. And so on the defensive tackle side of the equation, we're keeping 9 defensive linemen, 5 DNs, 4 defensive tackles. And I actually think the defensive tackle lineup, when everyone's healthy, is actually pretty impressive. So you have Malcolm Roach, who's a guy who you trust and you brought back, then Colin Saunders, the free agent, Nathan Shepard, a free agent from the Jets, and then Brian Brzee, a first-round draft pick. And hopefully these are guys who stay healthy and contribute. Because you're going and you're cutting only 3 guys. You're only cutting 3 linemen. And this is where you kind of look at it and say, you're probably going to sign an extra lineman or 2, because 12 defensive linemen going into camp is not a big number. And so you're cutting the UDFA Jerron Cage, then Jabari Zuniga is the guy who was around last year, and then Prince Emili, who at one point this offseason was the only defensive tackle on the roster. But I think those are pretty easy cuts when you boil it down.
The defensive tackle spot too, I would hope at least from day one that Brzee is going to be a starter for you. I would imagine.
I don't think he's going to be. I think he's going to be a rotational guy. No, I don't think you're going to. I mean, I think you're going to use him from day one, but I don't think he's going to be the first guy off the bench. I think you're going to go with Nathan Shepard and Colin Saunders and work him in. Maybe by the end of the season, he is getting more 3-down work, but I think he's going to be a situational guy week 1 and then week 2, and then you're going to build him up. I think he's going to be a rundowns guy early on.
Like you said, with the rotation too, I mean, he can obviously earn more snaps as you go along. So that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, you paid Colin Saunders and Nathan Shepard a good money. Like, you didn't sign bargain bin guys. Now, both guys are on 3-year deals. They're making, I think, $7 to $9 million per season. Like, these are guys you expect to contribute. So, like, I mean, I don't think that you're gonna be like, man, Brian Brzee's never on the field. I just don't think you're going to just pencil him in as your number 1 guy on the depth chart, regardless of what happens in camp. Anyway, okay, let's move on. That was the defensive line. It's obviously the biggest position, so we talk about it the most. Linebackers. Now, this is the position where I get a little wild here.
Okay.
So, linebackers, I am keeping Zach Bond, who I think this is the year, got to do something. You got to be that Sam linebacker, because there is a need for one, and you got to be able to do it. I'd also like to see them get him more involved in the pass rush. I think that's something that they have not really tried to tap with him. But if you're going to keep him around for another year, you better. And it was something that you saw Caden Ellis do very effectively, and I think they have similar skill sets from a pass rush perspective. From there, you have Demario Davis, obviously, Andrew Dowell, who you're still keeping as that special teams ace, Pete Werner, and then the next two are kind of a question. I'm keeping DeMarco Jackson. He was your 5th-round pick last year. He missed the entire season with an injury. I think they want to see him. I think they want to get a look at him because you didn't last year, but you liked him enough to bring in, right? Kid out of App State. So I think I'm keeping him. And then I'm also keeping Anthony Orji, the UDFA out of Vanderbilt. He's a guy who was very productive, team leader, all around the field, misses a lot of tackles. So he's going to have to show that he can kind of rein it in. But I think his skill set makes a lot of sense. He reminds me a little bit of Quan, right? Like I think he kind of fits in with what you're trying to do. And so I'm keeping him. And so a lot of pressure on Anthony after this podcast posts. He's going to go out there. He's going to have to figure it out. Because the players I'm keeping too, I'm cutting, these are guys So Nick Anderson, I know a lot of people are going to want to see me put Nick Anderson on that line instead of Anthony, but I just don't think he fills that role right now that you need, which is a guy who can just go out and be a volume tackler if you need to replace Pete Werner for whatever time period he misses, if he gets hurt, right? You need that depth. Ty Summers, also a cut. Ryan Connolly, a cut. And then Nephi Sewell. This is the guy who I was kind of split. There was 3 linebackers, and I wanted to keep 2, which was Anthony Orji, DeMarco Jackson, and Nephi Sewell. And I ended up cutting Nephi just because I think we've seen what he has to offer. And right now it's not good enough. So I'm kind of projecting these 2 guys ahead of him, but that could shift. They obviously liked him enough last year to keep him on the practice squad and to give him reps in the preseason. So that's kind of where I'm at. But that's my one UDFA that I'm keeping is Anthony Orji, because I think he is an NFL ready body. I think he should have been drafted, and they just he's a UDFA on this list. He should have been a 6th-round pick.
Yeah, I'm curious with Zach Baun. At least for me, he's a guy that's been a contributor, obviously on special teams. That was something
good on special teams. That's something that a lot of people don't appreciate about Zach Baun. And he's been good on, but not just he's been a key contributor on special teams. That's what saves him on this roster.
And that's been big to me. Unlike a guy like a Peyton Turner, who's been a healthy scratch, not even contributing at all, kind of thing. When you look at
one block.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, so I'm a guy you're rooting for, but yeah, really haven't seen much. And I think it's kind of a little bit of the Saints' fault, obviously, because when he was drafted, it was kind of switched into a whole different role than what he really played in college.
Zach Baun is so one thing that we heard from Mickey this year was about the 9-0 prospects, right? If they are very good, but they're not a scheme fit, they'll put a 9-0 at the end. So if they're a 3rd-round grade, but they're a 3.90, you're not going to take them in the 3rd round. You might take them in the 5th round if they drop there because you like them that much. And I think that's probably what happened with Zach Baun. Is maybe he was a 2nd-round grade, but he was a 2.90, and they got into the 3rd round, and they were like, maybe we can make this work. He is a very good football player. He doesn't fit our scheme, but we're going to try it out. Just hasn't happened. Just has not worked. And I think that you have to adjust a little bit to play to his strengths, right? And you just haven't really done that. And I don't know. It's tough. I could see him going somewhere and being a 3-4 outside linebacker and having success. It's just not going to be on the Saints unless they adjust to accommodate it.
Yeah, and as you mentioned with Nick Anderson, obviously all the local fans rooting for the Tulane guy, undersized linebacker, we know, and I think there is a spot for him on the practice squad, but to make the 53, he'd have to be doing something obviously outstanding.
This is just a highlight reel of Anthony Orji. He wore 0 in college. He just gets upfield. He's always around the ball, and I think you're going to see this in camp, and it's going to flash in camp, and you're going to see a guy who's just constantly around the ball, making plays, getting upfield, harassing running backs and slapping at the ball and making plays. And it's going to stand out. I guarantee you, he is one of the guys that is getting talked about after, OTAs and the first day of pads when they come on and you hear him thump somebody and you're like, oh, okay. I genuinely think he's going to be a guy that people, that people fall in love with throughout camp. But
I guarantee he's already got the best last name for the Cajun Cannon.
Orji. All right. So defensive back. I always just kind of lump these together because I don't like splitting them up between safety and cornerback because I'm never sure. There's always like 2 or 3 that I'm never sure which part to put in. So I just do
Yeah.
defensive back. I'm keeping 10. And this is always one where you can go either way because if you have if you have, for example, an Eno Benjamin who contributes on special teams, that's probably going to take away a safety spot because safeties, cornerbacks a lot of times will be your special teams players because they are typically fast and they can tackle. It's just what they do. It's good their job. So it just makes sense that would kind of transition to being a gunner or you're, just kind of somebody who's going to sprint downfield and make a tackle in space. And so that's kind of where you end up with here. But so on the cornerback side of the equation, it's really not a big question here. Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore, Bradley Roby, Alontae Taylor. Now, I am keeping Isaac Yiadom on this list, and that's because right now I don't know who the gunner is across from JT Gray, who is also on this list. Isaac Yiadom did that very well last year. They brought him back. I think right now he's going to be the inside track at that role. I think Lonnie Johnson Jr. is the Justin Evans, the PJ Williams mold of a guy you could throw at cornerback or safety and feel comfortable with. You didn't bring PJ back, so there is a spot for a player like that, and I think he's it. JT Gray is obviously the special teams ace. Jonathan Abram is kind of replacing Justin Evans, right? A highly drafted guy who got kind of cast off from his first NFL gig, and now he's looking to make an impact in New Orleans. And Justin Evans is on the Eagles now, so there is an extra spot for that kind of depth safety. And then the other 2 safeties who are going to be your starters, Tyrann Mathieu, Marcus May. I feel pretty good about that list. The only question is who's that gunner? And so if someone beats out Isaac Yiadom and shows better in that spot, then they're going to go there. But right now, for me, it's Isaac.
Yeah, the Saints secondary is strong, and I know that was what was really odd to me. I thought seeing some of the mock drafts going into this year, some people had corner as a need for them, and I didn't understand that at all.
I think it's just corner's a need for every team every year. Right? Like there are so few instances where you're like, okay, we're set at corner. We don't even have to look at it. Like it just doesn't that team doesn't exist.
No, I thought that last year, and then look what happened.
Well, exactly. You went in last year being like, wow, we have 4 startable corners. Man, we're set. Yeah. Then all of a sudden you have Chris Harris starting across from Alontae Taylor.
Yes.
Like it goes, you get thin real fast. Anyway, so there's 16 defensive backs on the roster right now. It's the most of any position. I'm keeping 10. I'm cutting 6. So one of them is safety Ugo Amadi. Like he's a guy who I don't know anything about. He could be excellent as a gunner and beat out a guy like Isaac Yiadom. So he's something to watch. He's wearing number 0. So he'll stand out. Anthony Johnson Jr. is getting cut. He's a UDFA. Troy Pride Jr., Vincent Gray, Smoke Monday. People are going to get mad at me. Until I see him back healthy, I am not going to pencil him in anywhere. He doesn't profile as a gunner. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to be able to have on special teams. So for that reason alone, it's difficult for me to just pencil him in. Now he can go out there and just dominate, maybe beat out a Jonathan Abram, right? Maybe beat out a Lonnie Johnson. Right now, I don't know. I have to see him out there and see what he's got. They did keep him around, so clearly they like him. So he's going to get his chance. Now here's my one draft pick that's getting cut, and it is Jordan Howden. I just don't know anything about Jordan Howden. I don't see where he's going to impact the field as a rookie. And I think that you can cut him and stash him, right? He's a 6th round pick. No one's going to be falling over themselves to sign him on, to claim him on waivers, considering they weren't doing that in the 6th round of the draft anyway. So I think he's the guy where if you're trying to make space for somebody, he's the draft pick that I'm okay kind of stashing because I think you can, just like Jordan Jackson last year. Although you look at Jordan Jackson, he's on the Broncos now, so it doesn't always work out. Either way, I wanted to keep Orgy. I wanted to keep an extra running back, and Jordan Howden gets the short straw here.
Yeah, it could be interesting with Howden too, seeing what he's able to do in special teams because I know that's really, I would consider him to make his mark on his team, if anywhere, this year. And even going down the line, I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a guy you rely on to play defensive snaps.
He's going to have to make his impact as a special teamer.
Yeah.
maybe he is that gunner, right? Like you need somebody. You need someone who can be a gunner. You need someone who can be a jammer. You need someone who can contribute. And right now, I just don't know. Like I haven't seen him play. I'm not gonna pretend I've watched a ton of Minnesota football. Definitely haven't watched Minnesota special team snaps. He looks good. He looks like a good athlete. I just don't know if there's going to be a spot for him this year. Hence why he ends up on the practice squad. But I'm okay with that, right? Like I don't have an issue with putting this guy on the practice squad because again, he's a sixth round pick. You know, if someone comes and tries to sneak him off waivers, great. I'd rather if I had to pick between the two sixth rounders in terms of a guy that I think I would be worried about getting stashed off my practice squad and a guy I wouldn't be, it would be A.T. Perry that I'm more worried about. So if I have to pick one of those guys to stash him, I'm picking Jordan Howden. That's just
Yeah,
how it is.
you mentioned not knowing anything about Ugo Amadi. I'm going to throw in what's his name, Troy Pride Jr. in that one too. I know nothing about that guy.
He's been on the roster. Right? He's just not an impact. Vincent Gray too, which
Yeah,
I do appreciate.
him.
I do enjoy when I think there was a point last year where the Saints defensive backfield, the Saints defensive secondary was Vincent Gray and JT Gray. It was like like a law firm. It didn't go well either.
I was going to say not 50 Shades of Gray, just 2 shades of gray.
Yeah, 2 shades of gray. All right, and then special teams, no real conversation to be had here. I think you have Will Lutz coming back as a kicker, Blake Gillikin as the punter, and Zach Wood as the long snapper. Now, Will Lutz is not guaranteed his job the entire season, in my opinion. He took a pay cut. You're going to give him a chance. If he does not bounce back from what you saw last season, which was just not good, then I could see him losing his job. But he was fine throughout camp. So I don't think he's going to lose his job in camp. It's going to be a question of what he does during the games.
Definitely.
And I think that's part of the reason you're carrying 2 kickers right now. Because you want to know what your options are, right? Alex Quevedo was here last year. Blake Grupe is the UDFA out of Notre Dame. And so you're just going to see what they have. And then, like, if you do have to make a decision, you have to make a decision. I think Will Lutz is going to bounce back. I don't think what you saw from him last year was any sign that he's lost it. He made a kick from 62 yards, I believe, or 60, 61. I don't know. The first kick against Minnesota and the second one he missed by an inch, right? Like the leg is still there. I think it's more of just a confidence thing, like an instinct thing. And hopefully that was a 1-year kind of sojourn that he's back from. And we've seen that, right? Like Robbie Gould, I feel like got cut by 2 different teams and he's still kicking for the 49ers as late as last year, right? Brett Maher was a cast off that the Saints brought in and then wasn't good enough to keep here and then ended up on the Cowboys and had a really good season. Now, postseason notwithstanding, he had a really good kicking season for the Cowboys last year. Then he missed 5 consecutive extra points. But like, it's not unusual to see a kicker kind of go through the doldrums of, why isn't this working out? Either way, I think you're going to be fine. You have Blake Grupe, you have Alex Quevedo. Both of those guys are going to get cut. Maybe you stash one on the practice squad. I don't know. And then Lou Headley, who is here, and he's going to be fun to watch, but I don't think he's going to beat out Blake. But yeah, those are my last cuts.
Kind of, completely off topic. It's going to be curious to see at least what's going to happen with that punter that the Bills drafted has been cleared of, the charges now. And now, I mean, obviously, if he was worthy enough to be a 6th-round draft pick, you would figure that somebody's going to be interested in his services. Obviously, the Saints, I think, are very happy with Blake Gillikin, but just curious what happens with Matt Araiza.
Araiza, yeah,
Araiza.
Matt Araiza, the punt god, as he was called, I believe. Yeah, I mean, I assume he's going to get signed by somebody, right? Like,
it's really unfortunate. Obviously, you have your name just really tarnished and destroyed. I'm happy the young man got his name cleared, kind of thing, and now
he wasn't even there, right? Like it's not even like a lot of times you'll see these cases where somebody recants. Like Greg Hardy, right? Like Greg Hardy didn't go to prison because the person who was pressing charges against him did not show up to court, right? Like that is not the same as being exonerated. Whereas the evidence showed that Matt Araiza wasn't even at the house that he was allegedly acute or like that he had allegedly raped somebody. He wasn't even
Right.
there. And that's a very different situation, obviously, than the one I just described. So and teams did not touch Greg Hardy. Teams did not sign Ray Rice. Like they just never ended up on a roster again. I don't think that's what's going to happen for Matt because it wouldn't be fair. And I don't know about his character or anything beyond that, but if that's the reason he got cut from the Bills, then I imagine he'll end up back on a roster. Who knows? Maybe something else will come out that'll ruin his life. I don't know, but I imagine that he'll end up somewhere.
Although you know who never came back was Ray Rice, and I just don't know if he was done as a running back at that point or that video really just put the kibosh on everything.
Yeah, it's a good question. Because I think he was toward the tail end of his career from a physical perspective to begin with. If he was like a 30-year, well, I mean, look at Kareem Hunt.
Yeah.
Right, like very similar situations. They even both happened at an elevator, right? He got signed. And so it's like, if you're young enough and you have enough years ahead of you, you can get past it. If you were a veteran who, probably would be a backup,
correct,
right. Probably not worth the noise. Either way, the Saints don't have any players. The Saints don't have any players dealing with
domestic
stuff that they're going to get them cut. Apparently, they do have a running back who's dealing with an elevator incident. It was a dude he punched, which I guess is slightly better from a NFL perspective, right?
Yeah, except when he's on the ground and multiple people continue to hit on him, and then it doesn't look so great.
Oh, it was bad. It was bad. Yeah. But from the perspective of getting blackballed by teams,
right?
It's not. It's like getting in a fight at a bar is a lot different than punching your wife in an elevator.
No, what Kamara's actions was, if something were to happen where the Saints decided to move on from him, there would be, every other team in the league would be interested in his services. I still think I don't think Kamara is hit a wall in his capabilities yet.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe he has. Like you start to wonder, right? Like you go through an entire season with one rushing touchdown, and we're gonna pretend that there's no worry that maybe he has started to reach the back slope of his career.
I'm gonna chalk it up just to whatever was going on with that whole case kind of weighed on him.
Yeah,
kind of weighed on him during the season. So I'm hoping that, just because I'm not afraid to admit, obviously, huge Kamara fan, just the player and the person. It was a real letdown to see this happen to him.
Well, I mean, he was involved.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it didn't happen to him. He did something. And he's dealing with the fallout from that now. So I don't feel bad for him in that sense that he is dealing with the consequences of his own actions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely I think it happened to the Saints. I think the Saints are dealing with it in ways that they probably shouldn't have to be dealing with it. And that's why in a lot of instances, you'll see that player get cut. In Alvin's instance, he is so talented and he is so good that they're willing to accept it. And that's kind of the two-faced nature of the NFL, right? And we've talked about this. It's like, if you are good enough, you can get away with stuff. Now, I'm not saying Alvin should have been cut, but if he was a fringe of the roster player, he would have been cut. And that's kind of the rub.
Right. Like if he was Eno Benjamin, you would have said, see ya.
He would have been out the door, don't let it hit you on the way out, and I guess that's just America, right? That's capitalism.
Hey, talent trumps all, right? For sure.
Yeah. But all right. That's the end of the 53-man roster projection. I actually think, all things considered, this was a pretty painless process. I didn't think there were a ton of difficult cuts. And that could change because, again, as by my count, the Saints have 85 players, maybe 86 on the roster after Sage Dockstader. So there's spots to bring people in. And so you might end up bringing in a veteran tight end, a Foster Moreau, and that makes the cuts a little more complicated, although that's a bad example because you're just getting rid of Forrestal. But like, yeah, if Alvin ends up getting a suspension prior to the season, it gets a little more complicated. If you bring in a veteran running back, which you always seem to do, it gets a little more complicated. So that's just something that we're going to keep building on as the season goes. But I do think that this is always good to have kind of a baseline that we can look back and say, where were we in May and where are we now? Because things change.
Yeah, it'll definitely be interesting. I think for the most part, you nailed it pretty good. But yeah, like you said, there's going to be those names that end up rising and falling, and we'll see where that ends up happening. And definitely looking forward to just seeing whatever from these rookies over the weekend at mini camp, the schedule coming out, all of it's that appeases you before the training camp madness, and OTAs will be starting up soon too.
The appetizers.
Yes, exactly. Little tasty morsels.
The appetizer round. This time last year, I had Devon Azigbo on my roster, so things change.
I don't even know where he is right now. Wasn't he in Denver for a little bit?
He was in Denver. I'm not sure if he's still there, but yeah, he ended up in Denver, as did several Saints players.
Wonder why.
Yeah, crazy. But all right, that's it. That's gonna wrap up this episode. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Hope that all made sense. We're going to be back hopefully on Friday afternoon. I'm going to try to do a live chat. I don't know what Steve's schedule is. We'll have to hash that out. We'll see who's available. Either way, we'll do a live chat to go through the predictions, which will be out of week by week for the 2023 schedule. I almost said 2017. I don't know why, but that was like the number that came to my head, and then I changed it mid sentence. That's why I paused.
That's all right. I'm still saying Brett Favre's playing for the Jets, so
I think it was because I was split between saying 2023 and 17 game schedule. Anyway,
I can give you my prediction now: 17-0.
17-0. Yeah. Why even have the episode? Just say win. That was 17. Don't count. All right. This is Inside Black and Gold. Thanks everyone who listened. Thanks Steve for putting up with my long form make believe roster. We'll be back at you later this week. Sorry.
I was like, what else are we going to talk about?
Right. Howdy doody. All right, y'all. Be easy.